Looking at an excerpt, the first pages of Oscar Wilde's 1891 essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. I won't try to say everything that I think about this essay. I covered some things in the study questions, which I'll eventually review. But one of the study questions asks you to explain the importance of individualism in this essay. I would say it is the whole point of this essay. Wilde has an idea of what it means and what it takes to become an individual. He will mention people like the poet Keats, like the novelist Flaubert, like the scientist Darwin, as examples of people who realized themselves as individuals, or at least went pretty far. I think he mentions at the end some other people that he would say were able to do that, become individuals, develop themselves as individuals. Again, poets like Byron, Shelley, Browning, novelist Victor Hugo, Baudelaire, the poet, a lot of poets. It is the whole point, I think, of the essay. That is, that it's the thing that he values. And where does socialism come into it? Well, I mean, I think he believes that it's only in a socialist society that people would have a chance, other than these sort of isolated few individuals that we have now, people would have a chance to really develop themselves, to really become individuals in that sense of fully developed individuals. And I suppose, well, clearly the implication is that under the kind of society we have now, that's very, very hard to do. And that most people are utterly prevented from doing that because they have to work so hard to avoid starvation and misery. And that many of them in the 1890s were working incredibly hard and not avoiding starvation, poverty, misery. And there's some very hard thinking here in a way that if you live under those conditions, it's practically impossible to realize yourself. I mean, he has some harsh things to say about the poor that may be shocking and may actually be offensive. Uh, he says at the bottom of page 3, there are a great many people who, having no private property of their own, and always, right here, and being always on the brink of sheer starvation, are compelled to do the work of beasts of burden, to do work that is quite uncongenial to them and to which they are forced by the peremptory, unreasonable, degrading tyranny of want. These are the poor, and amongst them there is no grace of manner, or charm of speech, or civilization, or culture, or refinement and pleasure, or joy of life. Very hard words, but to him, just being realistic, that is, if you spend your life living in abject poverty, you are not going to be able to develop any of those things, which he thinks are the kind of things that make life worth living, the kind of things that you develop if you have the time and the ease to do. Grace of manner, charm of speech, civilization, culture, refinement and pleasures, or joy of life. It may, there's a lot to criticize there, I think, perhaps, in his attitude, but I think what he's saying is just the reality. So what does socialism mean? Socialism means getting rid of private property. Clearly, private property is the oppressor. Private property is what keeps the majority of the people living in want. A few people who have private property get to live different sort of lives, but he really says that they're not that much better off. I mean, they're definitely better off. But that property itself, having it, especially if it becomes an end in itself, the acquisition of wealth, which he says happens because we live in a status society where wealth is something that gives you status. So people naturally want it, he says, but it has its own problems. It property. That's why he's somewhere he says that one of the reasons to abolish private property is what it does to the rich. Let's see if I can find that. I won't be able to find it. No. I mean, he does say something to that effect that getting rid of private property will benefit everybody because everybody's individuality is held back by it. It really is quite an amazing essay. I think that there are some definite mistakes in it, and I think that to anybody reading it thoughtfully, it'll be obvious where he really goes wrong on a particular point. I'll leave that for you to find. Maybe you wouldn't agree, but I would definitely agree that he goes terribly wrong in his assessment of one particular thing. But otherwise, it's um, quite an interesting argument for socialism. You know, that is which is essentially getting rid of private property, which is exactly what socialism is, right? And exactly what Marx and Engels were saying in the Communist Manifesto that we had to do away with.